I saw her today at the reception, a glass of wine in her hand. I knew she was gonna meet her connection. At her feet was a footloose man. You know you can't always get what you want. Can't always get what you want. Can't always get what you want. But if you try sometime, you'll find you get what you need. Oh, baby, you get what you need. I went out to the demonstration, get my fair share of abuse, singing, we're gonna vent our frustration. If we don't, we're gonna blow a 50 amp fuse. What I say, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. Can't always get what you want. If you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. Oh yeah, you get what you need. Oh yeah.
Went down to Chelsea drugstore to get your prescription filled. I was standing in line with Mr. Jimmy. Man, did he look pretty ill. We decided we would have a soda. His favorite flavor, cherry red. I sung my song to Mr. Jimmy. Said one word, and that's what he said. He said, you can't
Always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. If you try sometime, you'll find you get what you need. Well, I saw her today at the reception. In a glass was a bleeding man. She was practiced at the art of deception. I could tell by her bloodstained hand. You can't always get what you want. Can't always get what you want. Always get what you want. If you try sometime, you'll find get what you need. Get what you need. Get what you need. Get what you need. Get what you need.
People think that a book consists only of a text and that you can digitize that text and then you don't need the physical object. But a book is a whole series of texts. There's a text in the annotations in the margin. There's a text in ownership and therefore potentially the readership of the book. There's a text in how the book's put together and how it's made, the materials it's made out of. They speak to the time and place that the person who read it lived. One of the great parts of AAS's collection is the Mather Family Library. And each successive generation of this family added to this library, and they added to the annotations in the margins. But one of my favorite quotes of all these annotations is an annotation that Cotton Mather made in a book. There was a book attacking him and attacking his family. And he wrote in the margin a quote from the Bible: "If mine enemy hath written a book, I will take it and bind it unto myself as a crown of thorns unto me."
In my experience, Bill usually talks longer than that, so I was expecting a little more than just that. Good afternoon. It's a mixed pleasure to see you all here today. We're gathered here, of course, this afternoon, thanks to the family of Bill Reese and the Beinecke Library, to pay tribute to a scholar and a friend, our own beloved Bill. Thank you, Dorothy. Bill's wife, Bar, Bill's sister, Terry, lost track of where you are, Bill's business partner, as well as all the staff of the Reese Company, a host of Bill's closest friends, and the Beinecke, for making this occasion possible for us. And thank you, all of you, for taking the time to come here today to honor and revisit how much you care about Bill Reese. In gathering today to remember Bill, we are processing our grief, all the internal thoughts and feelings we've experienced and will continue to experience because of Bill's death. And as we talk about and think about Bill, we will be pulling these feelings from deep inside ourselves out into the community, into this room, to experience mourning. Grief is what you think and feel inside. Mourning is when you express that grief outside of yourself. Mourning is kind of grief inside out. And mourning is how we move towards healing. This is hard, but necessary work. After all, we're still alive. We can't heal without mourning or expressing our grief outwardly. I think all of you already know this and unfortunately have probably experienced it close hand in your lives. So we're here today to celebrate Bill and our love for him. What an irony of life, that love would be the cause of our grief. But grief is the price we pay for that love. They go together. Our feelings of love for someone who is now dead are no different from when that person was alive. That love connection continues to exist. In fact, it never goes away. It is the stuff our universe is made of. That's what makes grief so hard. But when we open to the pain of our loss, when we acknowledge its depth and are willing to embrace it and discuss it openly, we honor it and the person who is the subject of it. That doesn't mean that our grief will go away. I doubt that any of us will ever forget Bill Reese or stop missing him. But in giving ourselves permission to remember and mourn him, we can legitimize our grief and get some comfort and joy out of hearing each other's experiences with Bill. Now, I know, because I am Bill's cousin, that most of the really good stories are not going to be from this podium. But I'm kind of hoping I'll hear a few of them in the hallways of the Beinecke later today. We may even today learn something new about Bill, who had so many different parts to his life and who remained to the very end such a modest and private public person that very few people could say they really knew all of Bill Reese. In short, we can keep Bill alive by sharing our memories of him. And through our remembrances, we can create meaning out of the horror of his death. We can give our feelings and Bill's life a greater context. Memory, after all, is an essential part of our humanity. It's a building block of our intelligence, our self-awareness, and our ability to grow and improve. We remember the dead particularly when their lives have proved a worthy example, when their acts or words have touched our hearts. I don't think this is a new concept for a room full of historians and book dealers. Granted, our memories tend to forget the bad parts and magnify the good parts, and that may be just part of God's grace in the whole mourning process. But our memories touch us so deeply because they are really a reliving, a re-experiencing of our feelings for this person, for Bill, and what he meant to us. We remember the dead whom we love as our way of not losing them entirely, of keeping them within the community they interacted with when they were alive. And this formal way of remembering helps us shift our relationship from physical presence to one of deep memory, so that healing can begin and our loss and the value of Bill's life can be put into a larger and more accessible setting. Again, I am preaching to the choir, I know. Having this memorial today is a way of showing our gratitude for knowing and experiencing Bill, and of saying to ourselves that we value those traits and qualities that we admired in Bill when he was alive. We hold these distinguishing characteristics up to keep them alive within us in the hopes that they'll continue to add value and meaning to our lives. Maybe we even hope a little bit that these qualities will rub off on us because we noticed them and valued them in someone else. Again, I'm preaching to the choir, I know. It would be an understatement to say that Bill's life amounted to something. You all wouldn't be here if he wasn't who he was, and what he had accomplished hadn't meant something really important to you. If you didn't love him in some way that you wanted to honor and make note of. We all have our personal Bill stories. He touched every one of us in some very special, meaningful ways. Many of you will share your Bill stories today from the podium, and I thank you deeply for doing so. I also encourage all of you to continue to share Bill's stories throughout the afternoon and evening, and from now on, at any time, whenever you who knew him gather together. I would like to briefly share some of my thoughts about my cousin. The brother I always wish that I had. Bill was, in the truest sense of the phrase, a gentleman and a scholar. He was also a family man, an athlete, an adventurer, a natural educator, an ardent lover of good books, good wine, good food, good women, and hard work. He lived life with such gusto and such an unparalleled curiosity. Just about everything fascinated Bill on some level, and just about everyone interested him. Bill had a generosity of spirit and resources that spanned his prodigious knowledge and regularly rained down on his many worldwide friendships. He was, as one close longtime friend said recently, usually the smartest guy in the room. Yet he remained largely unaffected by his brain power and his uncanny ability to synthesize even the most disparate and difficult range of material into some cogent whole. Always there was this great dry sense of humor that matched his boundless energy and his willingness to take on insurmountable tasks with the greatest of élan and effectiveness. His knowledge, as we all know, was both wide and deep. His goofiness, both entertaining and endearing. There isn't a game that Bill didn't master, or a sport that he wasn't exceptionally good at. And I'm pretty sure there wasn't a subject he didn't at some point have a book on. I have been, like so many of us here today, constantly enriched and enlarged by knowing my cousin Bill. At the risk of overly lionizing him, my cousin always seemed to do the right thing at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons. We all know that that combination is rare indeed. He exemplified for me the highest standard of integrity and service within our family, within the larger group of friends that we shared, and within what I know of his profession. He gave so generously of himself and of his ideas and his material assets that we will never know the full impact of his life or how many people he truly touched. In his modesty, of course, Bill didn't want us to know that. And so we don't. I am so glad that Bill knew great love with Dorothy. and that he had a rewarding business with Terry and a staff that he adored, appreciated, and counted on at the Reese Company. I'm so glad he had his sisters, Kathy, who's now deceased, and Barr, who is very much alive, and that she produced 3 magnificent children who were and still are the apple of Bill and Dorothy's lives, as well as all of ours. And it's a great delight to me to have seen Tessa a few weeks ago. I'm sorry, to have seen Sarah a few weeks ago and realize that her little baby is named William. There is still a William around in the world. Beware, next generation. And I'm glad that Bill had the farm as an anchor, as a source of strength, as well as a creative canvas in these later years, and always as one of the many places where he and Dorothy and their tribe, and there is a tribe, could gather and enjoy life together. Bill's life wasn't anywhere near long enough for all of us who loved him. There was much more that he could have and would have done. There are so many more people he would have touched if he had had the time. But the important thing to me is that even though this was a life cut short, it was a life fully lived. It was a life that mattered. And Bill made sure it was a life we would all remember with a smile and some good stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Posie, and thank you all for coming today to honor Bill's life. I'd like to note before I begin that though they could not be here today, my sisters, Sarah and Tessa, helped me greatly in the writing of this eulogy. When I was younger, I often enjoyed eating breakfast on Sunday mornings with my family at a small restaurant called Uncle Bill's Pancake House. As the name suggests, they were widely known for their pancakes. I, however, enjoyed eating there not because of their short stacks, but because I had an Uncle Bill. It was in large part due to this diner that I grew up knowing Bill as Uncle Bill. The prefix to his name slowly, in my mind, became an honorific title as I began to understand just how impressive he was. I had a famous uncle, and it somehow seemed especially cool that his fame was limited to the largely unknown world of antiquarian book dealing. I'm glad that got a laugh in this crowd. Accounts of his brilliance were a source of pride for our entire family. My admiration for Bill developed through such stories. It was not until my late teens that I questioned my perception of our relationship. The prompt for review came directly from him, as he asked my sister Sarah why, of all our avuncular relations, he was the only one we continually named as uncle. What was for me something that needed no explanation was for him an idiosyncrasy that set him apart from our other family. In this, he wasn't wrong. However, it was not only his title that set him apart. With reverence came intimidation and an inability on my end to openly converse. When I began to call him solely by his name, our interactions began to flow more freely. I began to actually experience and embrace his wit, intelligence, generosity, compassion, characteristics which I had previously only been able to observe and admire. This change in the way I engaged with Bill was for me a certain awakening to the power of words. The term uncle had so strongly defined my ability to relate with another person. Bill, through his extensive reading, deeply understood language not only as a mechanism by which information is communicated, but also as a way for individuals to express and convey the wide range of emotions intrinsic to the human condition. It was his ability to translate written word into the underlying sentiment that enabled him to so fully understand history, not only as discrete events, but as continuous narratives of personal and collective experiences. Through his baritone voice, he brought his understanding of the past into the present by way of vivid storytelling. He was generous with the knowledge and wisdom he acquired, sharing carefully considered advice and guidance to those who sought it. Though there were many instances when he provided me with counsel, it was not any particular moment of mentorship that endeared me to him. Rather, it was the model of magnanimity and love that he embodied. The power of story also impacted my sister's relationship with Bill. Tessa writes, "Being a niece to Bill has been a choice on both ends, he embracing uncle and me embracing niece. It was a unique and special bond, and one I feel the absence of deeply and dearly. Bill had his unique ways of uncling, and one of them was to give books. When I was younger, I remember being baffled by some of the books he would gift me, often a reach beyond where I thought I was at the time, and yet remarkably right in line with where I found myself to be a little while later. One of the first books I can remember him giving me was Aesop's Fables. This book had a profound impact on me as it taught me how wisdom can live within stories and how our moral compass is built up of the lessons and guiding figures we encounter, not only in the flesh, but in books as well. The fable of the wind and the sun, found in your leaflet, is one that Tessa feels captures a certain quality of Bill's. For my part, in recent years, the farm on which Bill grew up and where I have been living was a central part of my interactions with him. Conversations had while walking the property helped me to develop my understanding of land conservation and stewardship. He would often, when speaking of land management decisions, employ a quote by Thomas Jefferson. "The earth belongs to the living," Jefferson wrote in a letter to James Madison. In his letter, Jefferson explores what obligations one generation has to the next. On this topic, he goes further in saying that by the law of nature, one generation is to another as one independent nation to another. When Bill evoked this quote, he wasn't saying that obligations of the dead should be forgotten, rather that it is the responsibility of the living to incorporate the teachings of their forebears into their decision-making, and in so doing, bridge the gap between generations. I am now an uncle. My nephew, William, Sarah's son, is not yet 2 years old. The fact that he too is named William is to me impactful and not coincidental, as it highlights the cyclic nature of family bonds. As I begin to define my relationship with my nephew, I will undoubtedly turn to Bill's model for guidance. Bill was a central figure in my own coming of age. He enabled me to find my voice and, with occasional subtle coercion, to make decisions independently. He always treated me as an equal. Bill has touched the world in many ways. One perhaps lesser known or more private way has been through the maintenance of a strong sense of family. As he taught me, the earth belongs to the living. I will do my best to continue his legacy, not least through my own role as uncle. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Randy Katz, and Bill and I were students here in the mid-'70s. Before I talk about celebrating these 40-plus years of knowing Bill, I want to share a little historical perspective of the building that we're in, the esteemed Yale Law School. I'm sure Bill would want me to share this with you. As undergraduates, we had very little reason to be here, except for the occasional art history class. But there was one notable exception. The Yale Law School Film Society showed films here. These were not just any films, they were very special. It was known as Porno Night. Yes, Porno Night right here at the law school. So here we are again, except this time for something worthwhile. For those of, as I said, I'm sure he would want me to share that. For those of us who were lucky enough to have known Bill all these years, he has given each of us countless memorable moments and stories. I tried to remember the first time I met Bill, but those memories seem to be a little foggy. I'm guessing it was probably due to the choice of refreshments at the time. But I do have many memories that are still intact. One of my favorites was Bill's 30th birthday party in Amagansett. It was debauchery a la Bill at its finest. It was a big group of friends and family, and he was the master of ceremonies. Certainly another favorite memory of mine was when Bill was a groomsman at our wedding 31 years ago. He became known as the bookman to my LA friends. I have a photo. Here we have him in tuxedo, not often seen. The bookman. I met up with Bill in London about 15 years ago, and he had arranged a day of touring follies. I had no idea what follies were, as probably many of you don't as well, but he was determined to teach me. So he booked a car and we headed to the countryside. It was classic Bill. Our first stop was the Rothschild estate, and we go inside of this big, beautiful old building, and I saw what appeared to me to be a collection of really, they looked like rare books. And Bill chuckled and said, "These aren't books, they're furniture." So he spent the day lecturing and storytelling. As everyone knows, there is no finer storyteller on the planet. I've had so many occasions to watch Bill hold court with his fantastic group of book people, many of whom are here right now. And he was always captivating in that really fantastic Bill Reese voice. He could explain why a particular book or character or location was significant, and he would always leave you mesmerized. Every time I would think to myself, how does he know so much? During our Yale days, I knew that Bill was into books, much like a nice little hobby. It wasn't until several years later that I realized his real prowess. He was in LA in the mid-'80s, and it was a Saturday morning, and we dragged ourselves out of bed because he had to go see a book dealer. We arrive at the store, and there's a man in a bow tie and a suit, and he looked very dapper. We did not look that well. Two guys in their mid-20s in jeans and t-shirts and a little hungover. So Bill began sniffing around the shop, and of course, he knew exactly where to sniff. And the bow-tied man was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. And at this point, Bill goes up to him and says, "Hi, I'm Bill Reese." And the man literally stopped. And he started fumbling for his keys. And he goes, "You're Bill Reese? I read your catalogs." And he started unlocking things left, right, and center. It was fantastic. So that's when I had a pretty good idea that Bill was not just a hobbyist. To be Bill's friend is something extraordinary and unique. He is not only mind-bogglingly loyal, but he had this incredible capacity to appreciate and take extraordinary pride in his friends and their abilities, always without a hint of envy or jealousy. When Tony Williams became mayor of D.C., he beamed like a proud father. As Jimmy Armstrong expanded his business and became successful, it was as if Bill had done it himself. He spoke of Polly Draper's successes like a brother. I'm still waiting for Will Getzman to be named president of Yale based on Bill's accounts. Truly. Bill once told me that I should have my own TV show to feature my passion for restaurants and electronics. Who else but Bill would think that there's value in this? Just as extraordinary is that this pride in his friends extended to spouses and children. I heard nearly about as much about Mariko as I did Will. When my wife Kathy was on a few episodes of Beverly Hills 90210, Bill was overjoyed. Little known fact, it was one of his favorite TV shows. He knew every episode. It was fantastic. I would say one of my favorite memories of Bill was watching him give what I call the Bill Reese tour of his personal library. He gave this tour to both of my children. It was Bill at his absolute best. He leapt from shelf to shelf, almost elf-like, picking out just the right materials and just delighting in the explanation. And then afterwards, he told me how impressed he was with my kids and how smart they were. It was like a proud grandparent. I've had the good fortune to spend quite a bit of time with Bill during the last several years. He knew of my personal history with cancer, so when he was diagnosed, we spoke quite a bit. He never complained, not once. During the past year, I became keenly aware of how dire his situation was, just on my knowledge of what the treatments that he was given were. He never mentioned it. A few months ago, I was here. We went out shopping for dinner. And on the way, he said, "We need to stop at the cancer center. I need a blood test." He said, "I know you won't mind going. I can't take anyone else here." So it was just business as usual, stopped in and then carried on. But I would say that one of the greatest pleasures of knowing Bill all these years is being able to experience and watch the evolution of Bill. Much like his headquarters on Temple Street, Bill has improved and evolved in so many ways since our early days. Of course, in those days, he was smart, right? Incredibly smart. But oftentimes, to people who didn't know him, he was a bit intimidating, a little rough around the edges. But over time, his gentle nature smoothed those rough edges. He also grew increasingly wise. He became mentor, advisor, and friend to so many in so many different capacities. But I think, for me, the best part of his evolution was just how happy he was, to the very, very end. The last time I saw him was at their house just a few months ago, and as he headed off to work, he walked over and gave Dorothy a kiss, and he just looked so happy. I mean, this was just a few months ago. So this is how I will remember Bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Sid Lapidus, Chair of the American Antiquarian Society. Unlike Randy's personal remembrances, many of which were humorous, mine is more of an institutional remembrance with only some funny parts. Dorothy, condolences. To you and the extended Reese family, at this service of remembrance for our dear friend and colleague, Bill Reese. At Dorothy's request, I am honored to speak on behalf of the AAS. Many of my AAS colleagues are here today, including Ellen Dunlop, our wonderful AAS president and a true dear friend of Bill for many decades. It is fitting that this celebration of Bill's life is taking place here in New Haven at the Beinecke. Bill was so proud of the university, and in particular, its libraries. Just a few years ago, Bill, along with E.C. Schroeder, who I'm sure is here, who I haven't seen him, director of rare books and manuscripts here at the Beinecke, and also a member of our AAS Council, led my wife and me on a tour of Beinecke and Sterling. We had never been here. I was here for a lecture, and Bill insisted that I had to go on this tour, and he was right. The pride Bill took in these marvelous libraries was so evident. Even for me, connected as I am with Princeton and its Forrestal Library, it still was pretty impressive. As you know, Bill was a thinker, doer, and leader in so many ways, especially for what he did for the AAS over many decades. Prior to my joining in 1998, the AAS Council, our governing body, I'd gotten to know Bill as a client. I had become a serious book collector, with my original focus primarily being pamphlets of the American Revolutionary era. And not surprisingly to most of you, Bill was the dealer from whom I bought the most stuff. My friend Jock Herron, vice chair of the Antiquarian Society, was the principal draftsman of a recent AAS resolution honoring Bill. Quote, "One of the great bookmen of his or any other generation, Bill Reese was unmatched in his multidimensional generosity as a scholar, collector, dealer, educated, and philanthropist. Perhaps no institution benefited as much from his counsel and support in so many ways and for as many years as the American Antiquarian Society. Bill became one of the youngest members ever at 25, was elected as a council member in 1992, and was a longtime member of the executive committee. Every aspect of the AAS, our collections, our fellowship programs, our cataloging proficiency, our strategies, our overall governance, and our treasury has been enriched by Bill." End of quote. Bill was the pillar of the AAS. Some years ago, when I decided to resuscitate our executive committee, I had to start with Bill. He knew everything about business, book collecting, other archival institutions, and most importantly, about people. Bill knew and was known and admired by most everyone in the American and indeed transatlantic antiquarian book world. Part of what made him so successful was that he was always, as was said earlier, the epitome of a gentleman. And we at the AAS were so fortunate to have Bill amongst us. He was a giant, a giant. We all admired him, and we all loved him. In July 2014, Bill, Ellen Dunlop, and I had the honor to visit the White House on behalf of the AAS to receive from President and Mrs. Obama the National Humanities Medal. Of course, it was an important and significant occasion for the AAS, one of the most important in our history, but it was indeed an unforgettable experience for all of us. Bill just glowed. This was great. And he was right. No one told me, but it must have been Yale Day at the White House. David Bryan Davis, the revered Yale historian of slavery in the Atlantic world and also an AAS member, also received an NEH medal that day. A few days after the White House event, Bill wrote to Ellen the following note. "Dear Ellen, I hope you are still floating on clouds of glory. If you agree it is appropriate, would you forward this message from me to all the AAS staff?" He didn't want to go direct to the staff. He thought it proper to go through Ellen. Last Monday, Sid Lapidus and I were honored to accompany Ellen to the White House to receive the National Humanities Medal on behalf of the AAS for its sterling achievements as a repository and guardian of the American past. It is you, the staff of the AAS, and there are many of you here today, and thank you for coming, who have built and safeguarded this institution, who should have been there as well. As one who has believed in the AAS and its mission from the day I first crossed its threshold more than 40 years ago, I want to thank everyone, make this honor a reality, and to make the AAS what it is, the preeminent guardian of the printed past of the American people. Before closing, Dorothy asked me to recognize the Reese Fellowships in the print culture of the Americas. Bill created and sponsored these fellowships at 13 institutions around the country. With a few exceptions, these are research fellowships in American book history. I hope and suspect that some of the recipients of Bill's generosity are here this afternoon. Bill will long be remembered and celebrated as one of the AAS greats, an exemplary leader in so many ways. To quote Jock Herron again, Bill fused gravitas, imagination, curiosity, common sense, and the good humor needed to help the society move with confidence into our third century. Dorothy, thank you for sharing Bill with us.
Good afternoon. I'm Alfred Harrison. I got to know Bill through our membership in the Walpole Society. And Bill and I were the only dealers who were actually members of the society, so we naturally gravitated to each other to compare notes, especially on difficult clients and other such problems. Everyone else has outlined his virtues, but I'd like to mention one that hasn't been stressed, his wonderful sense of humor. We could see it in his Christmas cards that Dorothy and Bill sent out every year, and in many, many other ways. Bill also fancied himself to be an amateur poet, and so I thought it might be appropriate to memorialize him in verse. I think he'd be amused, so here goes. In Memoriam, William S. Reese. In our era when our forefathers' sins have been stressed and their values don't pass our morality test, though we concede that they preached freedom from tyranny, it was freedom for some, leaving out way too many. American history has sunk to a perilous low, a subject that few care to study or know. How in the world can a business survive, or in the case of Reese Company, actually thrive, when its main source of interest is on the decline, as American history rots on the vine? In our era when virtually all is online, rare documents and such are so easy to find. Maneuver your cursor for a fast point and click. There's Jefferson's letter on your screen, nice and quick. Who needs the original? The content is out. The role of the collector is diminished, no doubt. How in the world can a business survive, or in the case of Reese Company, actually thrive, when the field of collecting has seen a revolution? Everything's changed, and there's no easy solution. The answer to the above questions is not far to seek. The company's leader has to be unique, has to combine vast knowledge with a pleasant demeanor, have a clean reputation that every deal makes cleaner, has to hunt through the world for overlooked treasures, a collector himself who knows all its pleasures, chases with fervor Herman Melville material, the great man's lost handkerchief and books more ethereal, a tireless supporter of libraries and such, to the AAS, Beinecke Grolier, contributing much. The New York Times called him a towering figure. In the world of Americana, there was nobody bigger. The year 2002 is one to remember, for it was then that the Walpole Society got a new member. In 2002, William Reese joined the ranks, ordered a gorget, and accepted with thanks a leadership role, becoming member in charge of many great meetings where the pleasures were large. In Fort Worth, we donned shiny shoes and black ties to watch cutting horses beneath Texas skies. In Worcester, Bill used his extensive connections to gain access to museums and private collections. And then, near the end, at the top of the bay, at Seven Springs Farm, we had a wonderful day, riding in pickups over pastures and hills before a delicious dinner. And Bill paid the bills. In other ways, Bill was a generous contributor. In his role of secretary, he became the distributor of information that Walpoleans needed to know, the location of meetings, when and where to go. And sadly, the names of the newly departed in emails that always left us downhearted, especially the one he was not able to send, that told us his life had come to an end. And now, crushed with sadness at the loss we've been dealt, remember that sadness only comes after joy has been felt. Bill enhanced our existence, and the enhancement survives, not only in memories, but in the parts of our lives that knowing Bill improved. And so, our grief-stricken attitude should be tempered at once by feelings of gratitude. Thank you, dear friend. Thank you. Goodbye, William Reese. May your spirit live on and your soul rest in peace.
Thank you all for coming and helping celebrate Bill's life. I wanted to share a poem. It's by Judah Halevi, and it was written in early 1100s. I thought that was particularly appropriate. It's called "'Tis a Fearful Thing." 'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be. To be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me. Your laugh once lifted me. Your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing to love what death has touched.
named after my mother. My old man is another child that's gone old. If dreams were lightning, thunder was desire, this old house would have burned down long time ago.
Make me an angel that flies from Montgomery. Make me a poster of an old rodeo. Just give me one thing that I can hold on to. To believe in this living is just a hard way to go. When I was a young girl, I had me a cowboy. He weren't much to look at, just a free rambling man. But that was a long time, and no matter how I try, the years just flow by like a broken down man. Just a hard way to go.
Good afternoon. I'm Clarence Woolf, bookseller, happy to be a footnote in Bill's narrative. I first met Bill nearly 50 years ago when he, along with his parents, made a pilgrimage to Philadelphia. They'd come from their farm in Maryland in order to visit Sessler's bookshop because of their interest in Audubon prints. At that time, Sessler's was Philadelphia's premier bookshop, and Mabel Zahn, its proprietor, was the doyen of Philadelphia booksellers. It was, As Newbold Smith put it, where all the swells bought their books. After the Reeses had finished at Sessler's, they made their way to the McManus Company. Our old shop was located on Irving Street and was, to say the least, a much less traveled thoroughfare than Sessler's more upscale Walnut Street address, and in those days, not the poshest of neighborhoods. Our building was one of several carriage houses that sat behind the Library Company and the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And it was the only commercial enterprise on the block. When the Reeses came in, when I asked Mrs. Reese what they were interested in and if they wanted my help. Mrs. Reese went on to explain that they were interested in Audubon books and prints, and continued by saying that their son, young William, was interested in Western Americana. Here I was, face to face with this tall, gangling lad of 14, who proceeded to ask all manner of questions about Americana, and Western Americana in particular. Despite having convinced myself that the vast amount of knowledge I had acquired in my first year as a bookseller would be more than sufficient to handle anything Bill could ask, turned out to be wrong. And I was unable to answer the majority of Bill's question. I just remember being somewhat slack-jawed at how much this kid knew, not just about the books, but the subject matter as well. Now, in order to look somewhat credible, and what I can only call an act of absolute desperation, I produced a Western book and proceeded to offer it to Bill, telling him that in the entirety of my career in books, I had never seen nor handled another copy. His reaction, dismissive at best. Bill then went on to explain why the book that I showed him really wasn't important, and continued by telling me which books were. I don't think that the Reese's visit resulted in a sale, but I did take their names and included them on our mailing list. Several years passed before I had more contact with Bill. During his time at Yale, he joined forces with Fred White, a Texas bookseller, and became partner in Frontier America Corporation, which was based in Bryan, Texas. The company's primary focus was Western Americana, a subject Bill knew and loved. Shortly after throwing in with Fred, the Jenkins Company of Austin acquired the Eberstadt collection, a greatly prized and much publicized assemblage of Western rarities. During one of what was to become frequent trips to Austin, I met Bill. He was now 19 or 20 and was a much more mature version of the boy that I first met in Philadelphia. At this point, I think we each felt more comfortable and sensed in one another a kindred spirit. Over the next few years, while Bill was still with Fred White, we had infrequent contact, but there were enough business dealings to stay on each other's radar. In 1979, Bill dissolved his partnership with Fred, divided the business, and moved to New Haven. In his first catalog, Bill announced that he had moved, bought 409 Temple Street, which he was in the process of renovating, and would happily welcome visitors upon its completion. My first visit was memorable. David Holmes and I had gone on a wild goose chase to see books in Falmouth on Cape Cod. We had been offered a collection that was grossly misrepresented, and in addition, the owner of the books was a singularly unpleasant man. On our ride home, while we were ruminating about the day's unhappy events, I remembered that Bill had moved to New Haven. These were pre-cell phone days, so it required that I pull off Route 95 and call Bill. I got Bill on the phone, told him where we were, and asked if he was in a position to receive us. By all means, was the response. Our mood improved, and we made our way to Temple Street, which at that point was not quite finished. At the time, Bill was living on the 3rd floor in a fashion befitting an undergraduate. Books were piled on the floor, boxes were scattered about, and there appeared to be no apparent order. That aside, I remember that our first transaction was a great success, and that we were all quite pleased. That was the beginning of what was to become a near 40-year friendship and business relationship. To say that Bill hit the ground running would be an incredible understatement. In short order, he became the wunderkind of Americana, and whatever pretensions I might have had of occupying that position quickly dissipated. Brilliant, gifted, driven, and hardworking, Bill was the James Brown of booksellers. He used all of his gifts wisely. His catalogs, beginning with the very first, demonstrate his knowledge, scholarship, and taste. At the time of his death this past June, the Reese Company had issued its 357th catalog. They contain and describe countless rarities, are prized references, and are treasured by many. In addition to catalogs, Bill wrote several books, some of which have become the standard reference. His sixth score, the 120 best books on the cattle industry, published in 1976 when he was a junior at Yale, is considered the best work on the subject, a must for any collector of bovine literature. Bill inscribed my copy, calling it, and I quote, an edifying piece of cow-chip literature. He went on to write Stamped with National Character, 19th Century American color plate books, published by the Grolier Club in 1999, and most recently he wrote The Revolutionary 100, The Federal 100, The Best of the West, and lastly, The Struggle for North America. These have already and will continue to be the go-to references for their respective fields. In addition to books, Bill wrote numerous articles and was a frequent speaker as well, covering topics that included American historical bibliography, the history of the book trade, and book collecting. Because of his brilliance and expertise, Bill had a hand in building great collections, working with both individuals and institutions. He was extremely generous with his time and in his willingness to help others. Consequently, people sought his advice and counsel. Collectors and institutions were not the only ones who sought Bill out. Other booksellers did as well. He had the rare ability to have partnerships with other booksellers and to do it seamlessly, a rare gift when one considers the disparate personalities of the book trade. Bill was such a towering figure that it was next to impossible for me to grasp the idea that he was sick. He first told me about his illness when he was driving back from his farm and stopped to see me in Bryn Mawr. When I asked how he was, his answer was he didn't know. Not prone to ambiguities, Bill went on to explain his diagnosis and the course of action that was planned. I was stunned and confused. How could this happen to someone who I considered to be an indestructible force of nature? For the next 5 years, Bill carried on as usual, often returning to work after a chemotherapy session. As in all things, he was grace under fire and carried on as if nothing was wrong. I visited Bill in the hospital about a week before he died and then saw him at the farm the following Saturday. Bill was as sharp as ever, even correcting Don Heald as to where a print had been acquired. Bill's passing is a loss that is shared by many. His family, friends, colleagues, and the institutions and collectors that he served. The rhythm of my life has been greatly altered, and I know the same can be said of others. His friendship, his philanthropy, his keen intellect and scholarship will be missed terribly. I think it is safe to say that Bill has earned a place in that rarefied pantheon of bookmen that includes names like Huntington, Rosenwald, Rosenbach, Eberstadt, and Streeter. Our book world is a small one, but Bill's presence made it so much larger. And in the end, I can only say how privileged I was to have known Bill and to have counted him among my dearest of friends. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm George Myles, curator of the Yale Collection of Western Americana. To Dorothy, Barbara, Reverend Jackson, Andrew, to Will, Mariko, Zoe, Emily, and Todd, to Terry and Laura, to Leslie, and to all the past and current employees of Reese Co. who are here today. Please know that all of us in the Yale Library, all of us here today, are united with you in the grief and mourning that we all feel at Bill's passing, and also in the love we all feel for him and for you. Bill's death was a wound, a searing pain that brought tears to my eyes and left me speechless for weeks afterwards. As the months have gone by, that raw wound has begun to heal, and I've begun to recover my emotional composure. My soul still aches when I think of Bill. I expect that it always will. But I've come to appreciate that ache, for while it is painful, it also triggers memories. Memories of time with Bill that remind me how fortunate I am to be able to say, I was a friend of Bill Reese. I hope you won't consider me self-indulgent if instead of providing a dry, accurate summary of Bill's many accomplishments and of his extraordinary service to the Beinecke Library and to Yale University in general, that I share a few stories. Personal narratives, to steal Bill's phrase, drawn from memory. You'll have to decide whether the narrator is reliable or not. The earliest, oldest memory I can summon of Bill is 43 years old, almost to the day or to the week. It's late September or early October of 1975. Though I can't recall the specific week, I know it was a Wednesday afternoon because we were sitting in Howard Lamar's graduate seminar in the history and culture of the Trans-Mississippi West, which met every Wednesday that fall in Beinecke Library's room 28. I was in my second year of graduate school, one of nearly a dozen graduate students in the seminar. Bill was a junior history major, the only undergraduate in the class. And I confess that through the first few weeks of class, I can't recall taking notice of him. But each class session would begin with student reports intended to spark and shape class discussion. Typically, us being graduate students, they focused on interpretive differences among scholarly experts. But at this class, the third or fourth of the semester, Bill had taken responsibility for starting our conversation about Lewis and Clark, an American exploration of the Trans-Mississippi West. And there was Bill in what I came to recognize as his unofficial uniform. Running shoes, khakis, and an open collar shirt. He was sitting beneath William Clark's magnificent 5-foot by 3-foot manuscript map of the West, which hung framed on the classroom wall. And over the first 30 minutes of class, Bill not only discussed what the exhibition accomplished, but also the bibliographic history of its publications. He introduced a cast of 19th and early 20th century editors, printers, and publishers unknown to me at the time, from Nicholas Biddle and Paul Allen to Eliot Coues, Francis Harper, and Reuben Gold Thwaites. He traced the history not only of the expedition, but the history of how the story of the expedition reached the American public. It was a bibliographic tour de force that anticipated all the things we now think of as history of the book. It was one that left me, and from the looks I saw on the faces of most of my graduate colleagues, channeling Butch Cassidy talking to Sundance about the Pinkertons, who is this guy? At that point, Howard knew what we didn't know, that the previous winter, Bill had identified a 16th century map of Mexico City at a furniture auction in New York, had purchased it at a steal, and sold it to Beinecke for the cost of his remaining undergraduate tuition. By mid-spring of that year, he had, while completing his sophomore year at Yale, he had purchased a private collection of more than 4,000 volumes of rare Americana, partnered with Fred White Jr. to found the rare book firm Frontier Americana, and would spend that next summer cataloging and selling books in College Station, Texas. A few months after his presentation in Howard's seminar, Bill published his first bibliography, to which Clarence referred earlier, 6-score, the 120 best books on the range cattle industry. I had been introduced to genius. Nearly 6 years later, in the spring of 1981, I was fortunate to be offered the opportunity to succeed Archie Hanna as curator of the Yale Collection of Western Americana. Rudy Rogers, the university librarian, appointed Bill to be advisor to the collection. It was the best bon voyage present that any wet behind the ears academic novice curator could ever receive. Bill never regarded his appointment as conferring authority or power to make decisions about the collection. He treated it as a commitment to be available, to answer any and all questions that this naive young academic might have about the antiquarian book trade, and to gently guide my development. Meeting antiquarian booksellers was the first priority. Early in my tenure, I recall Bill hiring a town car to take us to Montclair, New Jersey, to chat with the legendary bookseller Lindley Eberstadt. I was a little puzzled that we needed a town car to do this, but Bill knew that the best way to get Lindley to talk freely about Americana and the book trade was to take him to lunch at his favorite Chinese restaurant. And Lindley never drove, and Bill observed that we had zero chance of persuading him to get into either of the beat-up used cars that we were driving at that point. Lesson 1, know your audience. Over the following months, Bill took me to meet Warren Howell and Bill Reedon in California, sent me off to Chicago to meet Ken Nebenzahl, to Boston to see George Goodspeed and Sam Morrill. But Bill didn't just introduce me to the old guard, many of whom were about to retire from the trade. He went out of his way to make sure that I got to know the emerging figures in the field, his principal competitors in the Americana trade. Michael Ginsberg, Michael Heaston, Clarence Woolf, Bailey Bishop, John Jenkins, Dorothy Sloan, Peter Crawley, Walter Rubin, many others. This is a pattern that continued for decades as Bill went out of his way to make sure that I met up-and-coming booksellers, Dave Chefchek, Mike Vinson, Lauren Baer, Don Heald, and on it went. Indeed, I can't recall a book fair at which Bill didn't encourage me to visit one or another dealer. They have interesting things, he would say. My visits to 409 Temple Street were an advanced seminar in primary sources for innovative scholarship in American history and culture. Bill allowed me to occupy him for hours at a time to chat not only about the books and manuscripts in the latest Reese Company catalog, but available in the trade at large. He helped me to appreciate that academically trained scholars too frequently focused on the same canonical sources, overlooking opportunities to delve into neglected sources. We bonded over a mutual fascination with Native American languages, illustrated travels, and 19th century city directories. Bill was especially helpful in guiding me through the ins and outs of auctions. He would gently dissuade me from placing overly aggressive bids on books or pamphlets that he knew would reappear in the trade shortly. At other times, he warned me that my proposed bid wouldn't get the job done. In June 1998, Pacific Book Auctions, aka PBA Galleries, listed for auction a copy of G.R. Farden's Views of San Francisco, the first photographic view book of any North American city. Only a half dozen copies of the album could be located, and none had been offered at auction in 100 years. It was a book that fit Beinecke's interests. It was a book that excited Bill as well as me. And over a course of a couple of weeks, we decided that since it was unlikely we'd ever have another opportunity to obtain a copy, we should bid extremely aggressively. With Bill's encouragement and the support of Beinecke's director, Ralph Franklin, we set a maximum bid at 3 times the high estimate, $150,000 hammer. If we won the lot at that bid, the House Commission would raise the total cost to nearly $175,000. It was by far the highest bid I'd ever proposed. At the sale on June 25th, we ended up being the underbidder to Frankel Gallery of San Francisco. I resigned myself that we would never acquire a Farden album for Yale and began to think about other acquisitions. Less than 2 weeks later, I picked up the phone in my office to hear Bill at the other end say, "How'd you like to get a Farden with more pictures for less money than you were willing to pay at auction?" He had learned about an album that was in the hands of an East Bay family since November 2nd, 1858, when James DeFremery had inscribed it as a gift to his wife. DeFremery had added additional photographs of his house and neighborhood to the album, and that album had stayed in family hands for 150 years. The publicity generated by the sale had led the family to reach out to Bill, who leveraged the auction house premiums to set a price that cost us less and paid the family more than either of us would have realized at auction. I think he took a special pleasure at being able to do that. Over the next few years, the Frankel Gallery broke the copy they had purchased, selling the photos individually. I suspect Bill knew he could have done the same thing, but instead he wanted to see that volume at the Beinecke. Later today, if you want, you can see that copy acquired with the help of Bill's magic touch in a small exhibition back at the library. In 1987, Terry Bellinger asked Bill to teach a class on Western Americana at the Rare Book School, then operating at Columbia University. Bill generously told Terry he would do so only if I was appointed co-instructor. We eventually taught 4 times at Columbia and once at the University of Virginia. I've never told Terry, but I was always afraid that he would realize that I was learning as much as I was teaching in all of those classes and demand that I pay for the privilege. It was also in teaching those classes that I came to appreciate that the impish qualities of the undergraduate Bill Reese survived into his more mature years. Those of you who have taught or attended classes at Rare Book School know that Terry and his successor, Michael Suarez, do a fabulous job of arranging for evening lectures by scholars, collectors, librarians, and dealers. Faculty are expected to attend. But that hot summer week in Virginia, a friend of Bill's approached us and said that he could take us to Monticello that night. We decided to play hooky and commune with the ghosts of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings rather than attend that evening's lecture. Terry forgave Bill, who went on to deliver several notable stellar RBS lectures. I think I may still be in the doghouse. I can go on and tell many more stories that reveal Bill's erudition, his curiosity, his entrepreneurial skills, his commitment to Yale. But I'd like to close with 2 memories, one from my earliest days of time with Bill and one from this past winter, which remind me that Bill was as passionate about people as he was about books, and suggest to me that the Reese Company was as much about making friends as it was about making money. 409 Temple Street was always more than a site of business for Bill. He used to host visiting scholars on that 3rd floor bedroom. And I discovered early on that the best time to visit 409 Temple Street was lunchtime, when Laura Halliday would be serving her signature chili, seasoned by Archie Hanna's homegrown jalapeno peppers. Over the years, takeout replaced home-cooked meals, but Bill's reputation for hospitality never faded. Whether it was hosting dinner for the old book table or inviting Rare Book School students and instructors to drinks at Temple Street, Bill loved a good party. Last February at the California Antiquarian Book Fair, my wife and I were fortunate to join Bill, Dorothy, and more than 24 of Bill's colleagues in the trade for a dinner he threw after the book fair closed for the night. Bill's enormous smile, his booming voice conveyed the pleasure he took in sharing the time and the space with friends. That night it seemed as if, for Bill, the book fair's principal purpose was to get together with friends. Books were important to Bill, but the friendships they created were his lifeblood. Thank you for allowing me to recall Bill, to summon him in memory this afternoon. And I think I'm probably channeling Reverend Jackson, because I know that all of you have stories of your time with Bill. When you see me today or in the future, I hope you'll share them with me. They'll make me ache, but they'll also remind me of the great blessing I enjoyed in meeting and knowing and working with an extraordinary man.
It feels like a series of multiple hospital passes to have to follow these speakers. I'll do my best. I'm Ed Maggs. I'm a bookseller from London, England. Bill was one of us as a bookseller, and he was the best of us. He was the least cynical of people, and Oscar Wilde's cynic is one who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. Bill knew both the value and the price of everything. Commercial and cultural appreciation were in perfect equilibrium with Bill, and this is said, this in a trade where there are many of us who never read a book, and there are many of us who couldn't sell a $10 bill for $5. Bill relished being in the tradition of the Rosenbachs, the Robinsons, the Ettinghausen, Howells, Eberstadt, the list could be longer, and this love of the micro-history of the book trade coexisted with his huge historical knowledge that we've heard of before, and didn't he love showing it off? I remember him listing from memory all the British monarchs from Caractacus, I think. A recital in that deep voice that projected so well across the restaurant or the book fair. You could often find Bill in a book fair by the voice alone. It was like a bittern booming across the fen. That recitation was characteristically part of a performance over dinner, where sometimes there would be a little bit of the old general reenacting his great campaigns. And during these performances, I always expected the table ornaments to be brought into play as props. The pepper mill here would be Frank Streeter, the wine bottle Thomas, and advancing behind the bread basket came that copy of Champlain's Voyages. And as other people have said, many memories of Bill revolve around the dinner table, where he demonstrated his appetitious, discriminating delight and his enjoyment of company. Although I learnt much from Bill about books, about kindness, about history, none of them were as valuable as the key life lesson: always ask the price of the grappa. I got to know Bill thanks to, in the late 1970s, my father, John, wisely sent me to do an informal apprenticeship, not with somewhere respectable like Howell or Krauss, but with the maverick Johnny Jenkins in Austin, Texas, where Terry Halliday was one of the poor employees, one of the poor Jenkins employees, allocated to try and do something with this odd thing who had turned up. And he saw me through some memorable rites of passage in an intoxicating summer when I spent the days trying to catalogue Western Americana and the nights enjoying the life of a college town. Life moved on, and a few years later I was being kept occupied doing Sisyphean tasks in the basement at Maggs. It really was endless, the Maggs basement, when I was called up to the shop where some people were asking after me. It was Terry Halliday bringing Bill with him on an early buying trip to London. And I remember my first sight of Bill, tall, a trifle underfed, and big-eared. This wasn't just a joyous reunion with Terry, but the beginning of a new union between the William Reese Company and Maggs Brothers Limited in London. Maggs may not have been quite a sleeping giant, but it was certainly having a bit of a nap at the time. We had a legendary back stock, particularly of travel books, but much of it was in chaos. And although we were doing very well in some areas, in other areas we were really very, very dozy. And the arrival of a trustworthy partner in the States to collaborate with was an absolute godsend. For Bill was already, this is the early 80s, miles ahead of the rest of the trade in terms of energy, integrity, and ambition. Firms like us with legacy stock are often paranoid about prices. If you haven't bought the book, you haven't got the cost to act as a sort of a base. And to deal with us, to do business with people like us, you have to be very patient, very informed, and very gentle. And Bill was all these things. I know that Bill took pride in cracking the mag's basement, but we also took great pride in being cracked by Bill. Whether it was the intensity of Bill helped enthuse me personally about this trade, for I grew up surrounded by this funny old business, this funny old bookshop and the books, and I couldn't help but take it for granted as I tried puzzlingly to work out what it all meant. And the intensity of Bill's belief in the importance of this line of work really did inspire me. He helped make sense of it for me. His delight in every aspect of it was infectious, whether it was wrangling difficult collectors or conspiring with the nicer ones, whether it was sabotaging the plans of enemies or celebrating the successes of allies, enjoying the grim pleasures of the road trip, the bizarre, lightless intensity of book fairs, and the profound pleasures of discovering pearls in middens. Bill's influence continues. I drove here with his old friend Michael Zinman, one of the champion cloaca gleaners of the world. Michael pulled this out of his local bookshop in upstate New York yesterday and said he claimed not to have even opened it. And he said, this might be interesting to you. It turns out to be Dave Richards. Where's Dave? Dave's not here. Good, we can get away with this. This is the editor's set of a seemingly very rare juvenile periodical called Wee Willie Winkie, 1891 to 1892, with an interesting and apparently completely obscure contribution from Rudyard Kipling, printed in facsimile. It seemed wildly appropriate that this should have been the consequence of the event today. It wouldn't all have happened. Bill would have been tickled pink, and I don't believe that Yale have a copy. I don't think it's in Dave's bibliography. Michael and I had a discussion this morning about what to do with it. I said, Bill, maybe the appropriate thing would be to give it to Yale in Bill's memory. Michael was, he went pale. Give it. Sell it, said Michael. So that's one of the spirits of Bill. I don't think this will pay many weeks' tuition, but he might contribute towards the airfare. I was very proud when Bill spoke at the reopening of our bookshop a year and a half ago. But Bill also saw me at my very worst on a couple of occasions when his kindness was exemplary. This isn't the place for confessional, so I'll hold a couple of stories within, and I'll stick for a story of me at my second worst, or maybe third worst. You're worried here, aren't you? Some years ago, we planned a day out at the seaside in England to go and eat crabs at the legendary Company Shed in West Mersey. I was to collect Bill and Dorothy from their Park Street apartment in the morning. And I left a message the day before confirming the time that I was going to pick them up at. Could I really have specified 2 hours early when I misspoke it? Maybe it was 3 hours, maybe it was 4. Anyway, the message meant that they rose at a really unwholesomely early hour to spend a long time waiting for me. And I'll never forget the kind steel in Bill's voice when I attempted to deny my error. Bill said, I have the recording, Ed. Bill really was the perfect dealer and a kind and loyal friend. The most important thing about him is hard to express. Almost everyone here who knows him sort of knows this instinctively, but it's important for me to try and say it, and I can only say it with a certain coarseness in my language, for which I apologize in advance. One of the tragedies of the English language is that there isn't a positive word to express the sentiment that Bill wasn't an arsehole. The reason I say it is that he had every justification to be one. He was successful, he was handsome, he was eloquent, he was popular, and he wasn't an arsehole. Oh. I think Yiddish has a word for it, Mensch. But we'll have to rely on the relatively weak. Bill was a very good man. We'll miss him. Look, I haven't really got an ending for this. That when you finished, you end. And unless it's too mawkish, I'd say that there've been too many people dying these days, and we all gather to say how much we loved them. But let's remember to love the people that we can while they're still living, as well as remembering when they're dead. But thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. It's for Bill.
This institution was begun by Isaiah Thomas, an American printer. He was one of the primary patriot printers. He came to Worcester during the American Revolution when his political beliefs caused him to flee Boston. When he founded the American Antiquarian Society, his goal was to preserve the printed heritage of the American colonies that had become the United States. He knew what the printed word could do. He understood that words were what had built America as much as anything. An object can sit for 200 years, and nobody can know why it's needed. No scholar can put it in context until that moment when that piece of paper tells a story, provides a connection. You never know when some scholar is going to need that single connective piece that's going to make their whole story fall into place. That's why places like this exist, and that's why places like this are precious.
May God bless you and keep you always. May your wishes all come true. May you always do for others that others do for you. May you build a ladder to the stars and climb on every rung. May you stay forever young.
Okay.